Today we're taking rice, we're fermenting it and distilling it to turn it into this. And we're going to do it with a magical little thing called yellow label angel yeast. How's it going, chasers? I hope you're having a kick-ass week. I'm Jesse and this is Still It. Today we're exploring something that's really freaking cool. Angel yeast, but not the standard angel yeast, the yellow label stuff. This promises to make the process of creating something like a traditional Baiju or soju a whole lot easier, because the claim is we don't have to boil it and we don't have to mash it. What? To test this claim out, the claim that I can do it without mashing or boiling, I'm going to make 3 different rice washes and they are going to create the final products. But if you don't want to go through that and you don't want to see all the testing, you just want to see how to make it yourself in the way that I think is best, you can check the timestamps out down below or use the little play button here in YouTube to skip along to wherever you'd like to go to. So let's be honest, from the get-go guys, the instructions that come with this are kind of crazy. They don't make a whole lot of sense. 0.2 to 0.6% of stuff is the dosage, and how to use: starter activated by 5 to 10 times hot water, 35 degrees Celsius, then mixing with stuff. So I've seen a few different people decipher these instructions in different ways. And I think the best place for that is, you guys probably know the Teddy Sad's fast fermenting vodka that I've made in the past. The same guy has a thread on using this stuff, and there's a bunch of people that have sort of chimed in on it. So I'll put a link for that down in the description below. But the way I'm going to interpret it is, I think those directions, I can't read Chinese, so I'll read this side. I think those directions are talking about hydrating the yeast. So it gives you absolutely no direction on what to do with your grain. They just literally call it stuff. And that's it. So going back to that claim that we can ferment grain, a starch source, without mashing and without boiling. So I think what I want to do is test 3 different levels of crazy here. We're going to do one, which is the thing that completely makes sense to me, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be safe and it's going to work. We're going to boil the rice, let it cool down, and add the yeast. We are going to just add hot water to rice, let it cool down, and add the yeast. And then we're going to do something completely and utterly bonkers. We're just going to add cold water to the rice and then add the yeast. One of the things that it seems like everyone who's used this stuff can agree on is the fact that being able to mill whatever starch source you're using to a finer grain, or even sometimes people are going to like a powder, a coarse powder, means that things are going to go a little bit quicker. Now, I've never milled rice before. I don't know if it's going to work. So what I'm going to do is adjust the rollers to as close together as they will go, pop it through and see if the stuff will move through there, and see if moving through the rollers is actually going to crack it. The answer to that question is yes, it does work. It didn't exactly grind it down into a fine powder, but it did crack it down into much smaller pieces. Now we're going to divide that rice into 3. The first 2 kilos, we're going to boil. Rice and water go into a pot, and the pot goes on the stove. So just to be clear, in this step, I'm not that worried about how I'm cooking the rice. All I'm doing is cooking it to ensure that it's completely gelatinized, so we don't have to worry about that, and then we can compare it to the other 2 methods we're going to use later. Oh shit. Yeah, I kind of fucked up. So I don't know why I thought I could get away with cooking the rice like that. That was really dumb. I would never cook rice like that generally. In fact, there's only one way that I would ever cook rice to make sure it's actually cooked the way I want it to cook. Just ask Uncle Roger, he'll tell you. Rice cooker. In goes the water. The old first knuckle trick. But to be fair, I'm putting slightly more water in than that because we're making more like porridge than rice. So obviously I had to run a few batches of rice through the rice cooker to get that 2 kilos. But anyway, let me get this out of here and head back out to the shed before we get in too much trouble for making a big old mess in the kitchen. Back out in the shed, I added a little bit more hot water just to help blitz the rice up, and then topped it off with cold water to get to our pitching temperature. That wasn't too bad in terms of preparation, time and effort, and mess on the other hand, it was a little messy. Let's do the middle test, the one that I'm pretty certain is going to work and I think is going to be optimal, but that's the point of this video. We'll find out. Rice, hot water. In goes another 2 kilos of rice, and we top it up with around about 8 litres of water at about 85 degrees Celsius. Blitz it up and let it sit for an hour. While that was sitting, I could get onto the easiest of the three, which was literally dumping another 2 kilos of rice into cold water and blitzing it up. How insanely easy is that? The only thing left to do was to top each of them up to the 18 litre mark with either cold or hot water to reach our pitching temperature of 30 degrees Celsius. Our 3 separate rice wash test thingies are sitting over there ready to go. The last thing I did was just top them all up to the same level of water. Now we need to get on to the star of the show, which is the Angel Yellow Label Yeast. Now, this by the label suggests that we do 0.2 to 0.6% of the weight of the stuff that we're fermenting in yeast. I'm going to go with 0.6 just to give it the best chance of success, I assume, which is 12 grams each. So I'm just going to weigh those out, get them rehydrating here, which it suggests you do on the packet. So we'll follow the packet instructions and we'll get stuck in. This stuff has been sitting for 15 minutes. It's time to get it in with the rice and stir it up. It does have a very interesting, familiar smell to me that I can't quite put my hand on. It's kind of like halfway between kimchi and bread. I feel like there's a specific food that I should be remembering. Anyway, that doesn't matter at this stage. Let's get this stuff into the rice, give it another mix up, and then I'm going to ferment it at 30 degrees Celsius for however long it takes. I'm going to be checking in on this thing tomorrow morning because I'm interested to see how long it's going to take before we get action. The next day, all 3 fermenters were bubbling away, although they did look quite different. The 3 rice washes fermented away for 2 weeks, and I monitored them in a couple of different ways. First of all, I was looking at the starch in the wash using starch tests, and interestingly enough, the cooked and the hot water versions were pretty much the same, but the raw version did take an extra 2 to 3 days to show a completely clean starch test. That was at about a week and a half, and I was also taking gravity readings to see that the sugar was being worked on by the yeast and changed into CO2 and alcohol. All 3 of the washes fermented down to a little above 1, and once again the raw version did take an extra couple of days to catch up. After all signs of fermentation were gone, I just let it sit for 4 days to let everything sort of compact down to the bottom, all the chunky stuff, because we don't want that in the pot. Let that seal out down to the bottom, and now we're ready to distill. This first round of distillation is going to do 2 things. Number 1, I want to do a stripping run. So the final product is going to be basically a double pot stilled product. But number 2, I also wanted to see if there were differences in efficiency between the boiled rice and the raw rice specifically, and where the hot water rice sort of fits in the middle. To accomplish both of those things, we're going to be using the T500 in pot still mode, and we're going to perform a stripping run on each separate rice wash, and then measure the volume and the ABV of each of those stripping runs to see if we have a different total amount of pure alcohol in each. Now, just to keep things the same, we're going to distill down to 5% as a stripping run. And when I say 5%, what I mean is 5% literally coming off the spout, not the total volume of spirit, obviously. the results from the stripping runs are in, and for me, at least, they're kind of surprising. So, the cooked rice wash resulted in 2.7 litres at 20%. The hot water wash resulted in 3.4 litres at 21%. And maybe surprisingly or amazingly or magically, the cold water and rice resulted in 2.9 litres at 18%. Now, this is literally the worst possible thing to try and draw conclusions from, because I've got a sample size of 1 for each of them and it is flawed with a whole lot of different reasons. But the way I'm interpreting this is that the cold water works, which is bonkers to me. Absolutely bonkers, but awesome. But it is slightly less efficient than the others. The hot water worked wonderfully, and the boiled rice worked pretty damn well. But the problem was the way I was separating the wash that was going into the pot on the still versus the solids that were left behind. I literally just let it settle out, and it did not settle out nearly as well as the other two. In fact, I was probably about maybe 3.5 litres less wash went into the pot on that one. And I don't think that, it doesn't probably cover all of it, but it gets pretty close. Please guys, please, if you've experimented with this yellow label stuff, especially with rice, I would love to hear your findings down below. That will help us sort of get a few more data points on this and see if what I'm saying makes sense or not. For those of you that didn't want to watch the testing side of things, let's run through what I recommend doing in this situation with rice and yellow label yeast. First of all, mill your rice as finely as you can. You probably don't want a complete powder, but you want it broken up. 2, add boiling water to it. Let it sit for an hour and then top it up with cold water. You want roughly these ratios of rice and hot water and cold water. Once it is down to pitching temperature, add the yellow label yeast in and agitate the bejesus out of it. Let it sit for about a week and a half, 2 weeks, until you see all signs of fermentation stop. Ideally, temperature controlling it between 25 and 30 degrees. Then let it sit for about 2 or 3 days, let all the rice fall to the bottom or the yeast fall to the bottom, siphon off the top and into your still. Ideally, if you're going to do it like me and do a double distillation, you're going to make 3 times the sort of capacity of your pot and your still in terms of wash. So if you've got a 20 litre still, make 60 litres of the stuff. And then that way, once you've finished the stripping run, you'll have enough product to go back into the still for the spirit run. That's what we're about to do now. You're all caught up. Should we get stuck in? To keep everyone up to speed, we got all those low wines into the pot. We're running the still a little bit slower than normal, and we're running the T500 in pot still mode, which essentially means I'm only putting water through the product condenser, not the reflux condenser. I haven't removed any of the packing out of the still, just so you know. And I have been wanting to work on making cuts in real time a lot more lately. So I'm doing that today, which essentially means I'm just tasting the product as it comes off the still, and then based on taste sensation, I'm deciding when to make the cut for heads and when to make the cut for tails in real time. Now, if you want the safety net of collecting into separate jars, which is what I normally do, especially when I'm doing something new like this that I've never done before, that's great, go right ahead. If you're not quite sure what I mean, literally all it is for the whole run, collect off the still into like little 200 ml jars for this kind of size still, and then line them all up in the same order that they came off the still afterwards, and then you can go along and taste and decide what to keep and what to get rid of without the pressure of having to do it while you're running the still. There's a video up here that I do that in, so you can follow along with that if you want to. So at this point in time, there's not much else to tell you guys. I took about 80 mils of quote unquote 4 shots, those are gone, and then another 550 mils worth of heads. I've collected almost a litre of hearts so far, and the still is currently dripping off the spout at around about 65%, I'm guessing. Let me run this out, let me see if there's anything funky coming out in the tails that I make a tails cut for, and I'll get back in touch with you guys when we're ready to taste this stuff. Cool? Bang! Bam! Finished product. And before I taste that and tell you about the tails, I need to say a huge, huge thank you to the Patreons. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so freaking much. If you don't know, team, these are the people that allow me to make videos week in, week out, and I thoroughly appreciate it. All right, guys, so let's have a quick taste of this stuff. I'll pour myself a drink, but before we taste it, I need to let you know what happened with the tails. So we got down to about 55% and things started getting a little bit funky, but not funky like a whiskey tails sort of situation. It wasn't wet dog. It was very, very much a slightly earthy funkiness, but really, really ricey once it got down to about 55%. Think of that moment like when you first pop open a rice cooker, completely unseasoned rice, just literally rice and water, and that rice steam that comes rushing out at you. That was the flavor that was coming in down at about 55 to 50%, which was delicious. Once we got down to about 47%, things started getting slightly bitter and a little bit astringent, which was weird. So I let that go and waited until we got down to about 40% to see if we could find something else down to the tails, but it started getting almost sour and, funnily enough, tasting like old rice, like bad rice that you don't want to eat. So I cut all of that, and I ended up with 3 bottles once it was proofed down to 40%. And cheers, team. Let's have a drink. So the first thing you get when it goes into your mouth is that ricey flavor that I told you about earlier on. And then it sort of does a weird floral, fruity thing and finishes on almost an appley note. Not a green apple, like headsy weirdness, more like a red apple. That is really quite pleasant. It still has an alcohol presence for sure. It's not like crazy smooth, but it is relatively smooth considering it's basically a double pot distilled beverage. It does have a really fun sweetness and fullness to it. It's almost like it's been dosed with glycerin, actually. It's almost like that without that sort of slightly weird sugary thing going on that I get, and I know some of you guys get with glycerin. So all in all, I'm really happy with this, and I'm glad that I've got another 2 bottles sitting over on the shelf over there to let sit and pull out, you know, maybe in a year's time or something. So there it is, guys. If you're thinking about whether or not to try this, I would 100% suggest doing so. That Angel yellow label stuff is magic. I'm convinced of it now. It's magic. If you've tried it at home, please let us know your findings down below, because the more data points we have on that, the better. And if you've tried any sort of distilled rice product, I'd love to hear from you as well. Let us know how yours turned out. So, like always, guys, if you liked the video, hit the thumbs up button for me. That basically tells YouTube that this is a cool video and it should show it to more people. And that helps me out a heap. If you've seen a few of my videos popping up in your feed and you've enjoyed them, if you're not subscribed yet, make sure you hit the subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and I'll catch you next time, guys. Keep on chasing the craft. See ya.